Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down complex topics by getting right into the data and the sources behind them.
Okay, so what if the biggest problem in an election isn't actually the candidates, but the ballot itself? Let's dig into that by looking at a real-world election that really did spark a major change.
All right, let's talk about a tale of split votes and how St. Louis changed its elections. Our story kicks off in St. Louis, Missouri, and it's a mayoral primary that really put a spotlight on a fundamental flaw in the way we vote.
Okay, check this out. Just 32%. That was the winning percentage in the 2017 St. Louis mayoral primary. The winner, Lyda Krewson, took office with only 32% of the vote. Think about that for a second. That means a whopping 68% of people voted for someone else, but their votes were just too split up among all the other candidates.
Yeah, this is what's known as the classic vote splitting problem. You get a winner that the majority of people didn't actually want. So the city realized their whole choose one system was, well, kind of broken, and they decided to adopt a totally new method. It's called approval voting.
So, that brings us to the bullet voting myth. This was a huge criticism of approval voting. As soon as this new system was proposed, critics jumped on what they saw as a fatal flaw, a real boogaboo that they thought would doom the whole thing.
First things first, let's make sure we're on the same page. What is approval voting? It's actually super simple. You can vote for, or approve of, as many candidates as you like. You just mark all the ones you find acceptable. Could be one, could be all of them, could be two. You get the idea.
Now, the argument against it, coming from groups like FairVote, went something like this. Because approving a second choice may help defeat the voter's first choice, it is likely to devolve to typical vote for one plurality voting. Basically, they were worried that you'd be too scared to approve a second choice because you might accidentally hurt your favorite candidate's chances.
And that strategy has a name. It's called bullet voting. It's when you insincerely just pick one candidate to try and boost their chances. And the big fear was that everyone would do this, and approval voting would just, turn right back into the broken choose one system they were trying to escape in the first place.
So the big question is that what actually happens? Is that fear based in reality? Well, let's not guess. Let's look at the evidence.
All right, let's look at some evidence from the field, starting back in St. Louis and then going beyond. We're going to jump to their 2021 mayoral primary, because it was the first big U.S. election using approval voting where we got our hands on really detailed ballot data. It's the perfect test case.
And wow, the results are fascinating. Look at this. Nearly a third of all voters chose to approve of more than one candidate. 26% voted for two candidates, another 6% for three. I mean, this just completely contradicts that theory that everyone would just bullet vote for one person. People were clearly using the extra options.
And the system also showed us something really cool, how voters can team up to express strong opposition. These are the anyone but voters. Take a look at the folks who approved of every candidate, except for one. Almost 2/3 of those voters were united against the incumbent mayor, Tashora O. Jones. That's a powerful statement, a clear coalition that a choose one ballot would have made totally invisible.
Okay, so that's St. Louis. But you might be thinking, is it just an outlier, a one-off? That's a fair question. So let's zoom out and look at some historical data, comparing approval voting to its main alternative, ranked choice voting.
And when we do that, a really clear pattern just pops right out. This table compares the rates of bullet voting in both systems. And in 3 different comparisons, France versus San Francisco, the UN versus Burlington, USA versus Ireland, the rate of bullet voting was way lower in approval voting every single time. I mean, look at that first comparison set. Just 11% for approval voting versus a massive 53% for ranked choice. That's a huge difference.
Okay, so the data is pretty compelling, right? But it raises an even bigger question. Why? Why do voters act so differently in these two systems? Well, it all boils down to strategy and harm.
And to really get our heads around the strategy, we need to talk about something called later no harm, and a really famous ranked choice election up in Alaska. A controversial race in 2022 gives us the perfect case study of how these things can have really weird, unintended consequences.
So here's the paradox from that Alaska election. You had 2 Republicans, Palin and Bigich, running against a Democrat, Peltola. Now, about 60% of voters preferred a Republican, and most of Palin's voters ranked Bigich as their number 2. But here's the catch. Palin got eliminated first, and because of how ranked choice works, those second-place votes for Bigich didn't get counted until it was too late. The Democrat, Peltola, won.
The system basically ignored that 60% majority and produced an outcome that most voters didn't actually want.
And this really gets to the heart of the strategic choice a voter has to make. In ranked choice voting, if you rank your true favorite first, your vote might not be able to help your second choice beat the person you really don't want. But in approval voting, it's different. You can approve your lesser evil to help them win, and you can also approve your true favorite. There's no penalty. It's a much simpler, more direct way to express yourself.
Just think about a Nader voter back in 2000. If they had approval voting, they could have approved both Nader and Gore. They could have expressed their full preference, but with the system they had, they were forced to make a tough strategic choice, and that's why data shows that something like 90% of Nader's self-professed supporters ended up voting for someone else. They felt they had to.
Okay, let's bring it all together for the final tally. After looking at the real-world data and the strategy behind it, what does the evidence really tell us about this whole bullet voting myth?
Well, here are the key takeaways. First, that whole bullet voting criticism of approval voting, it just isn't supported by the real-world data. We saw in St. Louis that a third of voters supported multiple candidates. And when you look at historical data, bullet voting is actually more common in ranked choice voting. The bottom line is that approval voting seems to encourage voters to be more honest, while RCV's later no harm feature can, ironically, lead to outcomes the majority of voters really don't want. You know, in St. Louis, approval voting did more than just pick a winner. It revealed a genuine consensus and showed coalition preferences that a simple choose one system would have completely hidden from view. It gave us a much clearer, more nuanced picture.
And that's really the whole point. The system worked exactly as it was designed to. It allowed supporters of less popular candidates to have their voices heard without feeling like they were wasting their vote. Their vote still mattered and helped shape the outcome.
So it leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. If a ballot can hide what voters really want, is it just counting votes, or is it actually getting in the way of democracy? Something to chew on the next time you find yourself in a voting booth.